Today, we're going to dive into the pretty controversial ideas of a 19th century scientist who believed he could spot a criminal just by looking at them. Yep, we're talking about Cesare Lombroso and his incredibly influential book, The Criminal Man.
You know, it's a question that's been asked forever, right? Are criminals a product of their environment, or are they just born that way? Is it all about the choices they make, or is there something deeper going on, something baked into their very nature that pushes them down that path?
Well, this one scientist was convinced he had the answer. He argued that criminality wasn't really a question of morality at all, but of biology. He saw it as a kind of evolutionary glitch. It's a pretty wild idea, so let's really dig into what he was getting at.
So let's meet the man behind the theory, Cesare Lombroso. He was an Italian doctor who basically invented a whole new field he called criminal anthropology. His whole mission, his obsession really, was driven by this one powerful idea, that the roots of crime could be scientifically identified, measured, and maybe even predicted.
Okay, so where did Lombroso start his quest? Well, his first stop might surprise you. The weather. Yeah, he was totally convinced that the climate had a direct physical grip on our behavior, pushing us either toward or away from violence.
And look, his theory got super specific. This wasn't just a simple, oh, it's hot, people get angry kind of thing. No, he argued that when it's freezing cold, people get sluggish, apathetic, less likely to start a fight. But that nice, moderate heat, oh, that was a whole different ballgame. He saw it as a natural stimulant, like a shot of booze for your nervous system that just fired people up and led to impulsive, violent acts. A sunny day could literally make you drunk on aggression.
And of course, he thought he had the numbers to back this all up. He pointed to crime stats from France back in the day, and you can see it right here, this huge spike in sexual assaults during the summer months. For him, that was it. Case closed. The connection was obvious. The summer heat was literally fueling these violent passions.
And when you zoom out and look at the data more broadly, the pattern just seems to get stronger. Crimes against people, they more than doubled from winter to summer. That's a huge jump. So you can see why for Lombroso this was a massive deal. It made violent crime look less like a random act and more like, well, hurricane season, a predictable, almost natural event. But wait, there's a twist in his theory. He also noticed that property crimes, things like theft, actually peaked in the winter. So what gives? Well, his explanation was pretty simple. This wasn't about passion, it was about pure desperation. It's cold, resources are scarce, work is harder to find, and people are just trying to survive.
So, after tackling the weather, Lombroso's gaze shifted from the sky down to the ground. He started wondering, okay, what about the land itself? Could the actual geography of a place, its mountains, its flat plains, could that actually shape the criminal behavior of the people living there?
And what he found was, well, kind of a mixed bag. He saw that mountainous regions, with all those places to hide, tended to have higher rates of violent person-on-person crime. The flat plains, on the other hand, with their big cities and more people packed together, saw more theft and sexual assault. But the actual rocks and soil, the geology, nope, had no effect at all. So for him, it all came down to opportunity, not what was in the ground.
And that brings us to the real heart of Lombroso's work. And honestly, this is the most dangerous and lasting part of his legacy. Because at the end of the day, for him, the real answer wasn't in the sky or the dirt. It was in the blood. It was in what he called race, an idea based entirely on the scientific racism of his era, which has, of course, been completely discredited today.
To prove his point, he looked right in his own backyard, Italy. And what he saw was this absolutely shocking divide. The murder rate in the south of Italy was more than 4 times higher than in the north. 4 times. And to Lombroso, this had nothing to do with economics or social problems. No, for him, it was a direct reflection of the blood of the people who lived there.
And, let's just use his own words here. He directly connected the crime rates in southern Italy to the historical presence of what he called rapacious Berber and Semite tribes. So in his mind, it was simple. Criminal behavior was something you inherit, something passed down through your bloodline.
And he didn't just stop there. He took this idea to a whole new extreme, identifying what he called criminal centers. We're talking about entire towns, entire villages that he basically labeled as being populated by a delinquent race. He saw them as literal factories for churning out criminals generation after generation.
Just take the village of Artena, for example. According to Lombroso's study, the violent robbery rate there was 30 times the national average. 30! He literally called it a nest of sad robbers.
A place where being a criminal wasn't a choice you made, it was just your destiny, handed down from father to son.
And just to be clear, this wasn't only about Italy. He applied this same prejudice thinking to other groups, especially the Romani people, who he called gypsies. The language he used was just incredibly racist. He painted this picture of an entire group of people who are just born criminals. It's really important to understand, in his mind, he wasn't describing a culture. He thought he was identifying a biological problem, even calling them the living image of an entire race of delinquents.
So you're probably wondering, how does this all fit together? The weather, the mountains, the blood, how did he connect all these dots? Well, he tied it all up in this big, sweeping theory about how crime itself evolves. He argued that as societies develop and become more civilized, the type of crime they commit actually changes right along with them.
Here's the breakdown. He saw two stages. First, you have what he called primitive societies. Here, life is all about brute force, right? So crime is violent and physical. But then societies evolve into modern ones, and the game changes. The fight for survival is now fought with brains and trickery, not fists. So violent crime gets replaced by things like fraud and scams. For Lombroso, the criminal drive is always there. It just gets smarter.
And that brings us right back where we started. But now the question feels a lot more unsettling, doesn't it? Look, let's be crystal clear. Lombroso's specific conclusions are seen today for what they are: total scientific racism. They've been completely debunked. But that central idea, the idea that maybe there are forces beyond our conscious control that shape what we do, well, that's a conversation we are still having today. We see it in genetics, in neuroscience. We're constantly exploring the biological roots of our behavior. So yeah, we've thrown out Lombroso's ugly prejudice answers, but we're still kind of haunted by his fundamental question. If our choices aren't 100% our own, then what does justice really look like?